Our interviewer today is Mary Ann Childers. She is one of the most respected and recognized voices in Chicago broadcasting. She is an Emmy Award-winning anchor and reporter at ABC and CBS-owned stations. She is going to interview our guest today, who is the chairman of the Chicago Blackhawks. He has served in this position for nearly 11 years. And when he spoke at the City Club the last time, he said, "My goal is very simple, to win the Stanley Cup championship every year." On a personal note, first of all, he's so smart, I forgot to mention it, that he had his wife, Marilyn, join us today. Marilyn, where are you? Raise your hand. There we go. Give her a round of applause. Thank you. And Marilyn, we're expecting hard questions from you for the speaker today. Okay. But the Chicago Blackhawks, and Skinny Sheehan mentioned this, they've been very, very civic and charitable. And I wanted not only to acknowledge that there are many, many charitable gifts to Special Olympics Chicago, but also at Misericordia. I was up there this morning, and they were talking about Jonathan, how do they say it? Toes, whatever. I should follow a little closer. But he raised $300,000 for those children and adults by coming on up there. And so that takes great leadership, and I want to salute Jonathan and the Chicago Blackhawks. So without further ado, the video is on.
When we say short video, we are not kidding. Hello, everybody. Now, do I need to introduce this guy to you? Come on, Rocky, have a seat. I've got my timer, and I'll try to keep us on time because I know you like to leave at 1:15. We're going to talk about Breakthrough, the book, but first, I think we have no choice but to address the elephant that's in this room today. So, Rocky, I'm really sorry, but I have to ask you point blank. Are you thinking about running for mayor?
There's not enough money in this world that would ever have to, even J.B. Pritzker's money to be able to run.
You know, I should have asked him about governor. I mean, that's what the billionaires do, right? Seriously, though, you have probably supported a lot of political candidates over the years quietly, but you dipped your toe into the political waters this season, and you made a very big splash with $200,000 to Mr. Paul Vallas. Now, you did this before the current mayor, announced he's not going to run. Putting Mr. Vallas, I know he's here today, putting his very considerable attributes aside for a minute, what's the issue for you here, Rocky?
Well, I just thought it was important to have to have the voters decide for themselves and not just to have just one candidate out there that would raise more money than God. And I thought it was important I've known Paul Vallas both when Dan was alive and for a number of years, and I thought it was, he was certainly very capable. There's a lot of, capable candidates out there, but I thought it was very good. And he had the backbone to be able to go up against, Mayor Emanuel before, when he was still running at that time. So I just thought it was a good thing to do. Little did I know that the campaign contribution would make the front page of the newspapers. So.
I think most things you do, Rocky, make the front page of the newspapers these days.
I'm not used to that.
We like to see that. You've said you'd like to see Chicago go in a different direction. Part of that involves the amusement tax.
Well, the amusement tax is, unfortunately, is one of the highest in the country, both on sports and on entertainment. We had KPMG do a study just for ourselves, just to say, can you back up what you talk about the amusement tax? And it's 12% of both county and city for sports, it's 10.5% for concerts. Now, unfortunately, the sports fan is stuck with that, that 12%, the Bulls aren't going anywhere and the Hawks aren't going anywhere. But on concerts, that can make a difference. You can go out to Rosemont, you go out to Tinley Park, and now we go out to a brand new building in Milwaukee, and those new taxes are far less. So I told City Hall that this is like a death by 1,000 cuts. You see the hotel workers, number of hotels on strike now. It's because we have the highest hotel tax in the country. And again, you can't tax your way anymore. And I think that the public is concerned about it. I know I am, because both Jerry Reinsdorf and myself for the United Center aren't going to lose any sleep if the concert doesn't come. But we have over 2,000 employees at the United Center that will lose sleep over it because they're full-time, part-time individuals that will not have that job that night. And it is important for us to make sure that all our folks are earning a good living and they can keep coming to work. So it's something that I'm very concerned about, because these promoters don't look at dollars, they look at pennies. And unfortunately, it goes right in the fans and the music goers' pocket. So I'm very concerned about what we're going to do about it.
Nobody wants to pay more taxes on top of their sports tickets, which are expensive enough, or their concert tickets. But the argument can be made, Rocky, and I'm curious as to what you'd say, that people that have enough discretionary income to buy tickets really could contribute a little more. I mean, I think we know that certainly the money's needed here.
Well, where does it start and stop? I mean, our job is to try to promote the city. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be an Illinois resident for the rest of my life, and the Blackhawks aren't going anywhere. But there's plenty of other people that can. And there's a reason that you get people moving out of the state. And it's not because they don't love the state. It's just they're just sick and tired of the taxation and what's going on. And I think there's a time that we just got to stand up and say we're not going to take it anymore.
Speaking of taxes, your dad and Jerry Reinsdorf built the United Center. You've put about, I've heard, as much as $1 billion into it since, and in improvements and upgrades. The MB Ice Arena came out of your pocket. When you see things being built in Chicago, like the Wintrust Arena, even the Uptown Theater renovation, where you see tax dollars going into those kinds of projects, and you don't get a penny, what do you think?
Well, sometimes people say it's always a going business. You use your own money. It gets to be habit forming. But it's important. We put anywhere into, as you talked about, in the last number of years, and so we put over $1 billion, both for the original building, plus we put the improvements through the years. And just if we weren't improving, we put $3 to $5 million into it. So when you get these new municipal buildings, they're never as good as the moment that they're opened. And the nice thing about the United Center is we can reinvent it, and I would defy anyone for thinking a building that was built in 1994 is in any better shape than the United Center. And that's because we can be private, we can put our money in, but it's been very good to our family and to the Reinsdorf family, and I think it's been a great entertainment, and it's a wonderful thing for the city of Chicago to have and to call the United Center home.
As you look at the city now and you see the change, that we're facing change on so many, who knows what's going to happen, things are up in the air. Do you have advice for whoever is going to be the next mayor?
Well, I think the important thing, I wish I was that smart to give anyone advice, but the only advice I would give, if it's in business or if it's in politics, is you got to embrace change. It's going to happen all the time. And we can't sit back and say, well, we used to do it this way, used to do it that way. And if you embrace change and work with it, I think it goes in the way. But if you try to do things like you used to do it, I think you have a very, very tough time ahead.
Let's talk about your book. Let's talk about The Breakaway, actually written by Brian Smith. I got an advanced reader's copy. This is sort of like Dallas Dynasty and the intrigue of the barbarians at the gates. It's got everything in it but sex. And not a lot of that, but a lot of intrigue and a lot of action. Rick Kogan at the Chicago Tribune really said it best, though, because this is not just about the Black Hawk, it's about your family. It's about history of family. He said there was enough dysfunction for a couple of Eugene O'Neill plays. Sometimes you read something and you say, I wish I'd written that. Okay, Rocky, you've got the money, you've got the power, you've got the position, you can certainly protect your privacy, You don't have to air anything about your family in public that you don't want to. Why in the world did you agree to go with this book?
Well, there's a couple reasons. One, Brian Smith he had written an article in 2008 in Chicago Magazine, and he came in 2010 and 13 and 15 and kept saying, I want to write a book about your family. And I said, well, you know, and we resisted. But finally I thought about if we were going to do this, there's a couple caveats that had to be. First of all, any money made on the book had to go to the Black Hawk Foundation. And it was something that's very near and dear to us and our family to give back to the community. And we raise and give back over $2.5 million a year to different charities. And it's something that you know has to be fed every year so we can keep that endeavor up. And it has to be something that is be truthful and can't be a puff piece, because many people that are involved with any kind of sports teams want to read about themselves every day in the paper about how great they are. And I said, that's just not going to happen. So it had to be truthful. It had to be, the money had to go to foundation. And I thought that people, I don't know of any family that doesn't have dysfunction in it. And so if 99.9% of us have dysfunction, I think people can relate to that, because it's how, as a family, do you overcome that and move ahead. And we're very proud of that we, came over from Europe. We didn't have a nickel in our great-grandfather's pocket, and he earned it the old-fashioned way. And that was something that I thought it would be a nice way to tell the family story. And Brian, hired researchers to make sure that the facts were correct. And it would be a nice thing, because we didn't have anything written about the family and in the 30s, my grandfather and the Norris family, and what it is like today, because people know about, let's say, the last 10, 11 years with the Hawks, but they don't realize how we got here. And I just thought it was a nice way to do that, and then obviously would try to raise money for the foundation.
Very few members of your family besides yourself, I think 3, your son Danny, your cousin Bruce, and your Aunt Betty, spoke to Brian for this book. Did you give your siblings a heads up that there was going to be a blockbuster coming?
Well, Brian asked each of them, my siblings, if they wanted to be interviewed, and they all respectfully declined. So the big thing was that if you had friends, and especially classmates in high school, I had to make sure that they could actually, tell the stories, but not all the stories. So I said, there's a few stories you want to skip, and they knew exactly which stories to skip. Yeah, right. Because you might have been clean cut at the time, and that didn't mean you couldn't be a ringleader and get in trouble on your after hours.
Your brother Peter is described in this book in there's no way to say it nicely, extremely unflattering terms. Terrified of making decisions, fearful of taking risks in business, so loyal to your late father that he would not, in your judgment, be able to run the Blackhawks. Is he ever going to speak to you again?
Well, we don't speak a lot now, so it probably can't go. It's like falling out of a first floor window. You can't go too much farther down. I did get title insurance in case he does want to speak through an attorney, though.
Yeah, well, your siblings have in fact sued you on multiple occasions, taking the level of dysfunction to a new height. Thank God not in my family, hope not in yours. Do you expect a lawsuit from this book?
Well, I hope I would invite one, especially I guarantee it would help book sales.
That's right. Spoken like a businessman, Rocky.
Well, that's right. If we could get a friendly lawsuit, it would have been great, but I'm not sure. I felt like sending them an advance copy, but I thought that might be a little cruel.
All right, the family stuff is like the intrigue, the juicy stuff. But the story of the Hawks and the turnaround of this team, what's been called the most amazing turnaround in all of sports, really is an insider's view. I thought I knew an awful lot about it just from talking with you about it over the years, but you never told me, Rocky, that you found out you were losing $30 million a year when you took over the team just a decade ago. What was that day like for you when you saw the number?
Well, and especially back in if you remember in 07, 08, we said the economic, we didn't know if the banking system was even going to be around. So you had to do as much as you can to preserve cash. So it was not a good day when the controller said, well, we can't make payroll. And it was Blackhawks' second payroll. The first one, I said, well, what about, so we have 13 paychecks for the players. And he said, well, and this was only the second paycheck for the team. I said, what about the season reservation money? They said, well, we spent it all the first paycheck. I said, my God, that means I got 12 more paychecks we got to fund.
And that's when he said, I said, well, how much? He said, at least $30 million in cash. So it was a surprise that I wasn't prepared for. But I wasn't that smart, but I knew you had to go out and find a really smart individual. And that individual is John McDonough from the Chicago Cubs. He didn't know it at the time, but he is targeted, and the only reason the Hawks had done well is because John McDonough has done such a terrific job with the Hawks and the team he has assembled. So I can't compliment enough on what a fine businessman he is, who happens to be a sportsman.
Brian Smith, who's just a really good and colorful writer, I know you've read his work in Chicago Magazine, many of you. He has this great story about the meeting with McDonough. You're at Champ's restaurant in the suburbs. The meeting's been set up, and John's never seen you. He doesn't know what everybody knows him now, but no, he didn't know what you look like when he walked in. And of course, he walks in a suit, and he figured, okay, that's the guy right there. Well, John McDonough was like living his dream job at the time with the Cubs. What was your plan B, Rocky? How did you convince him?
I told him I didn't have a plan B, and that impressed him enough that I cut my teeth in the wholesale beverage business so I can sell. And so my job was to sell John on having a dream job with a a baseball team that's bigger than everyone else, that has a international reputation, and why you want to come to the Blackhawks. But I think what got John was that he got the uncommitment, or my commitment, of being able to win. And I told him then, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to win the Stanley Cup sometime before I hang up my loafers. And he believed that. And with that idea of winning something and really doing a job, and then quite frankly saying there's no sacred cows here, that I'll give you all the support in the world, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm not going to tell you can't talk to this person or that person, and you have a clean slate. It's your baby, and I'll be here to help you in any way I can and support you. I just don't want to read about different things in the newspaper. I'd like to know about them beforehand. And he believed that, and within 48 hours, he came back and said, no, I'm very interested. And then the nice thing is, I said, John, we could get to a 40 or 50 page employment agreement, or we can put it in simple 1 or 2 pages on a piece of paper and write it down, and you initial and I initial it, and we put it in the top drawer and never look at it again. And it's been almost 11 years, and we've never looked at that paper again.
Something else in the book, and I was trying to find an excerpt to read to you very briefly, but this theme runs so hard through the book, is the beating that your family took because of decisions that your dad, who was an unpopular figure, made, especially regarding the Blackhawks. The loss of Bobby Hull, not putting the games on television. You always kind of brushed that off in appearances and in conversations even with friends. But it was brutal. Do you ever get over that, Rocky?
Well, I respect the fans for their opinion, and they're entitled to it. But John and I have talked about what's worse is when they're no longer angry, when you're completely indifferent, then you have a problem. And the fans were indifferent, and consequently the Hawks have become irrelevant. Now, you don't know where you're going until you admit what you've done in the past. And so I can't point fingers on if I was in Dad's shoes, what I would have done or not. But I knew that when I was there, what we were going to do. So I never criticize them, publicly, and I never will. But it's when the papers would make it very personal, and it would make, of course, it wasn't very good. So one of my goals was to do what I could to help the Wirtz name to a level of at least be respectable again.
When did you make the decision to put the Hawks back on television? Because it's portrayed in the book as you practically did it standing over your father's body.
Well, I called my brother Peter together at the wake at Dunellen's funeral parlor and told him what we were going to do. And he said, well, I'm fine with that, which, I realized later that, he wasn't fine with it to the point where he was going to do his own thing and resign from the company because he couldn't, for whatever reason, do something that his father wouldn't have done. But I knew that if we had to, any way that we had to get respectability and get, fans to be able to engage yourself, I mean, Marianne, you and I were at school, I can't tell you when together, because that would tell you how old you are. But when I was at Northwestern, I belonged to a fraternity, and I'd go down in the basement, and you'd see all these, and it happened to be a kind of a jock fraternity, and all these, burly football players would be down watching soap operas. And to them, it was the biggest thing on their life in the lunch hour. And I figured, watching the hockey game is much like a soap opera. You can't wait for the next episode. And like soap operas, there's no reruns. And every game is like that soap opera. And it's very easy to get off. So once those individuals graduated, I guarantee they never turned on the TV and watched a soap opera again. And you realize how fragile that is. And once those fans were off the Hawks, they weren't going to turn that TV back on. So our job was to make it intriguing, something that was exciting. And if you couldn't afford to go to the United Center or didn't or weren't going to go, that you could turn on your TV and catch the next episode. And then what our job was is to make it very interesting, and then do what we can to make those players interesting so that they were more than one-dimensional. And if we could do that, then we could really develop this franchise to something exciting, then something the city could be proud of.
Brian writes that when you approached broadcasters to put the Hawks on television, they were thinking long-term. You were thinking like tomorrow.
Well, it's funny, we had our first meeting beginning of October. And Dad, my brother, would tend to start meetings late, anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour late. And so we called a 10 o'clock meeting, and some of the people sauntered in, and those from the Regional Sports Network, and then we had an attorney that came in and said, I said, no, we start our meetings on time. And he said, well, we never started them on time before. I said, well, we are today. And so when I said I want to put games on television, as you said, Marianne, they thought, assuming I was talking about next year. This is in '07. I said, no, I'm talking about now. And they said, well, most of all the advertising had already been let out, and we won't be able to get anyone to pick up the expense. And I said, well, does anyone from the Hawks ever help you sell? And they said, well, quite frankly, no. I said, well, if they won't do it, I said, I certainly will. I said, I can roll up my sleeves and help. And I said, we'll make calls together, because we had to raise that first year $350,000 to be able to cover the direct expense for both the league and the equipment. And so, for those home games we were able to put on. So we were able to go back to some of our liquor, suppliers. And, I told a little white lie that I told them that, to some of these suppliers that everything under $100,000 was already sold.
Did they buy it?
They did. So I knew I only needed 3. So I had 3 people that said yes, and I covered our expense.
There you were.
It's a lot easier to make 3 calls than it is 300.
For sure. Okay, so it's been just over a decade now since you took control. The season's almost here. Last year you didn't make the playoffs. You were disappointed. We were disappointed about that. But as bad as it was when you started, was it easier being an owner when expectations were really low as opposed to now?
Well, I mean, I'm happy that people have high expectations. There's nothing like it. And of course, we're disappointed by not making the playoffs. But the nice thing about the organization is they're never satisfied. And they weren't satisfied when they were on the top in 2010, 13, or 15 after they won. And they weren't satisfied last year. And so I'm very proud of what the organization did on the off season, and worked very hard, not to repeat this. And so I think that, going forward, I think we're going to have an exciting team this year. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope the people in the room are going to be excited as we are for the coming season.
Yeah, we can't really hear. If we lose his mic, somebody holler so we can adjust. Your team has gotten older, and I can't believe I'm saying this about 30-year-old people, but in the hockey world, when you're on the ice, it's a different thing. Aging players on the team, a lot of them earning a lot of money. You got to make hard decisions. Is anybody on that team untouchable?
Well, I think that that's going to be for Stan Bowman and John to work on it. And I don't right now I think the important thing is that everyone had. I think we just had our golf outing on Monday for the Black Hawk Foundation, and all the players were there, and almost to a player to the tee said it was way too long a summer. And they couldn't wait to get back, but they worked very, very hard in the off season. So some of these players that maybe, as you said, are a little older at 31 or 32, you just have to work differently as you get older. than if you're 18 or 20 or 21 or 22. And I think that these players are able to adapt, and I think you'll see that they'll have a very good year, and they're going to approach it a little differently. And I know for the coaching staff and for the players, they're excited for the season to come.
Rocky, what would you do if one of your players took a knee?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think the important thing is obviously the United Center and what we do with the Blackhawks for the national anthem. We heard it here today, and everyone stood. We believe in free speech, and that's up to each individual player. But we respect the flag, and we respect the men and women in the military and what they've, what they serve, both in the past and going forward. So I just think there's probably better ways to express your dissatisfaction than taking a knee. And then, quite frankly, if you took a knee on the ice, you might get cold by the end of the anthem.
The book is full of, there's like a million, this is really an insider's guide to what happened. So if you're a Hawks fan, you learn a lot of stuff you didn't know. But they talk about highs, they talk about lows, they talk about you guys not always feeling, sorry, Mr. McDonough, feeling quite so secure as you're trying to make the team relevant again. But is there one moment that stood out for you as like the absolute best moment?
That was 2010, when you finally won the Cup. And it was like the monkey was off your back. You don't know if the rest of your business life you would ever do it again. But then you were able to reach for it and really get something special. So it was in Philadelphia in overtime. And especially with the Philadelphia fans, were not very nice citizens. So there couldn't be any better than to win the Cup on visiting ice and just rub it into them.
And then to get out of Philly.
Well, that's why you have security.
What was the worst besides walking in and finding out you were losing $30 million that year?
I think the worst is that you realize you had to turn over most of the employees within the organization. And we have a number that are here today, but for all practical purposes, we had over 90% new employees within that first year. And the pace was going to be faster, and the commitment had to be there. And if you didn't want to play yourself on the team, that was unfortunate. But the good thing is, you knew those people that didn't want to be in the front office. But I think the nice thing is too, and John and I talked about this, is we didn't have any we and they. It was hockey operations. It was the front office. If it was in the in the accounting and in the finance side. It was like a three-legged stool. Every leg had to be as strong as the next one. So the nice thing is we approach it that everyone is just as important as the next person. The person cleaning up the locker room is just as important as Jonathan Taves, who's the captain of the team. The
guy that wrote the foreword, thank you. The guy that wrote the foreword to the book is a really great athlete, a wonderful gentleman, a Blackhawk ambassador, and a Hall of Famer. And he's here in the audience, and you wondered who's sitting in the mystery chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Tony Esposito to join us. Thank you. Thank you.
Do I sit in this chair?
Right there, for you.
And you notice, Marianne, he has one of his Stanley Cup rings on, too.
I notice, yes.
And he's left-handed, which I am too. So that's a very good sign.
I've fallen asleep in this chair.
Tony, you've seen the beautiful locker rooms, the MB Ice Arena. They have dietitians. They charter a plane, just like when you worked for the Blackhawks, right?
Oh yeah, we used to travel the day of the game. Sometime, get in and go right to the rink and play. Imagine that. Now they got it. It's so much fun now. I mean, you get on a charter, you don't have to go through security, as we all know. You go right there, you get on these beautiful planes, all the food and drinks are there, you get off and you walk off the plane and right onto a bus. You don't have to do the public service thing.
Did you use public transportation when you were a Blackhawk?
Well, basically, when I was a Blackhawk, we just went commercially. We'd go there and sit in the waiting room like everybody else, and get on the plane and go to your next destination.
And you were at the old Chicago Stadium, which many of us
Yes.
remember fondly. And now when you walk into those locker rooms at the UC, what do you think?
Well, it's just Rocky said it before. Progress, change is inevitable, and I think it's for the good. Everything is changing, and you got to stay with modern times. And unfortunately, Blackhawks didn't stay with the modern times till Rocky came in. We were sort of caught in the archaic approach. You know, don't spend any money. And if everything's going bad, cut. Rocky always said, it takes money to make money. So he invested a lot of money, and he's done pretty well.
You know, Brian Smith in this book that you wrote the foreword for says that, according to his sources, Rocky's siblings say, well, Kane and Taze were in place, and anybody could have come in and run the Hawks because it was already going to happen. I mean, the roadmap was already there. They say Rocky just got the credit for it.
I don't believe that. Rocky and John McDonough put this package together. They spent a lot of money, and they built a great organization. And the biggest thing that I got the old pet peeve. You build a franchise like he's done, and then you get stuck with the salary cap baloney. And you can't, you got to give up players, and you got to start over again. And we have a salary cap a hard cap of under $80 million. So when your players develop, their demands are greater financially, and you have to pay them. And you have to make a choice. Either pay the player, or you got to make a move and get rid of the player and get some younger players to redevelop. And unfortunately, what happens in a lot of sports, I'm not saying the Blackhawks did this, but a lot of sports, you got to offer them long-term contracts to keep them. You see it in ball now all the time. And in our profession, if you pigeonhole, or you got 8 guys making a ton of money, there's not a lot left for the other 15. So you have to make very, very tough decisions. And I don't envy you guys, because it's not the most popular sometime.
Well, and after 2010, 13, and 15, essentially you had to trade half the team and start over again.
Absolutely.
So it's credit to Stan Bowman and John and the rest of the organization, and the only way to do that is to develop these younger players so they eventually get up there. So it's an ongoing thing that you have to constantly reinvest to go forward.
Well, you're right, because, like, for example, the Blackhawks just need 2 or 3 key players right now, and you can buy them with free agency. However, you have the cap, and you can't buy them. Even Rocky would be over the cap a lot. I know he would be. But you can't buy them and to improve your team immediately. It's the rebuilding process. It goes on all the time in sports, and especially in hockey. You have to keep rebuilding, generate new talent. And it's difficult.
This brings us to an audience question that was submitted in advance, and it says, how do you plan to add to the strength of the Hawks defense given that the defensive lines are thin?
Well, a lot of times the press knows more than the hockey operations guys. So.
Really, Rocky? Really?
So they don't have to be as thin as sometimes you read in any of the publications. So I know that Stan and the folks in the hockey side aren't as concerned as some of the press. And we have some young players, and that's what training camp is for. It's going to be exciting. And I think that the fans will be pleasantly surprised when they see how some of these younger players have developed over time.
Rocky, I know a lot of people want to hear about hockey, but a lot of people want to hear what you think about the city, too. Question, how will Chicago and Illinois be able to address the billions in liabilities? We can't tax our way out of this problem.
Well, it's a good question. And, you know, we asked the question earlier, if you would ever run for public office. If I had that answer, you could certainly run for public office.
Well, you turn the Hawks around in 3 years.
I think it might be a little longer than that for the city.
Could you be persuaded? Nah, only kidding, only kidding. Someone wants to know, what do you see caused the fiscal mess that Illinois finds itself in? I guess they're asking for a business analysis.
Well, I think
there.
what happened is we didn't, you know, in the past, you know, we kicked the can down the road on these unfunded liabilities and didn't, you know, really look at how to fund, you know, future liabilities and just let someone else. It reminds you a little bit of the auto industry when the auto industry executives said, you know, I'll worry about it later because in 3, 4, 5 years, I'm not going to be at the helm. I think some of the politicians many times look at it that in 5 years they're not going to be in public office and just kick the can and let someone else worry about it.
One question here is, how do you see the Wirtz companies expanding? And I think perhaps this might be triggered or prompted by news this week that Breakthrough Beverage, the company that is your company in Canada, is entering the marijuana distribution business.
Yeah, so we made an investment, we being on our beverage company, Breakthrough Beverage, Canada, in a Canadian company that's called CanTrust that's traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And we will have salespeople, as we do now in Canada. We're essentially a broker, and we're the largest broker in Canada through every province. Now on beverage, on you know, liquor products and liquor and wine, and some beer. And we're going to do that as far as, you know, working with CanTrust and their products with the same liquor buyers that through these, the different, you know, beverage as far as the different provincial provinces. And then we'll have our salespeople go and service those stores. So it's also a way that we can work and learn about, you know, the cannabis business, and I think it can be a very dangerous product in the wrong hands. Not unlike alcohol, it needs to be regulated. It needs to have standards. It needs to be able, you know, not only on smoking it, but also on how you ingest it, what products it goes in, who sells it, what kind of liabilities they have if they sell it incorrectly. So I think that there's many things that we can help and shape in Canada with some of our liquor laws we have in the States. And if it comes to the States, that I think that we can work with each individual state on what they should do, social responsibilities and different regulations. So it's investment I'm happy we're making, but it's more of a learning process, what we're going to learn for if it ever does come to the States, and certainly what we can learn and help in Canada too.
Right now you distribute liquor in Colorado where it's already there. Marijuana has been approved for some time now for recreational use there. Are you seeing a difference?
Well, no.
In liquor sales there?
No, it hasn't. It's hard to tell because our liquor sales are up, but they might have been up more without it. But the big thing in Colorado is, you know, one of my things is on the social side or on paired driving. If we don't have a way to be able to judge what CHC level is acceptable in driving a motor vehicle, we do certainly for alcohol with our blood alcohol. But what do we do? And in Colorado, I always worry about, you know, if it's someone in the state being high in Chicago going down the Kennedy Expressway, someone rear-ending you, because it does affect depth perception. So I think there's ways that you know, different law enforcement have to be able to have standards on what's acceptable and what's not. And quite frankly, I don't see these states, including, you know, Colorado and California or anything else, on both the medical side and the recreational side on having acceptable standards.
Turning back to hockey and to sport, question from the audience. How do you think sport can be used as a greater civic strategy to connect communities and help unite Chicago? Hey, MB Ice Arena.
Well, MB Ice Arena is a good example of that. You know, what we do on our First Stride program, we work with the public schools. We have over 7,000 athletes, both on health, fitness, nutrition, and then we get them on the ice, and we do different STEM programs and what we can do. So it's not teaching them how to skate, but exactly how can you use hockey to help to make learning fun and exciting, and what it can do for you, and why why math is important and what is, what does technology and why does it mean anything? And so we have these programs that we work with, that we bring students in, and half the group goes up into a classroom setting, and everyone gets an iPad. And what we do is we have the same bandwidth we have at the United Center, but we can block everything else out so they're not surfing the net. And we can work with them, and then when they're finished that segment, then they go down on the ice and the other group comes up. And so it's been very successful, and we're excited about expanding that. But this is a good way that you can connect the community with some of these students. Think the only way you'd ever have ice is if it's in one of your drinks.
We call it a practice facility, but how much time do the Hawks actually spend on that ice?
If they spent 8% of the time, 7 to 8% of the time, that's a lot. So that's why we put 2 ice surfaces down, because when they're on it, there might be certain months when they're traveling and depending what's going on, that they might only be on it twice a month, because the day of game, they actually go on the United Center ice when they're home. But then, as Tony said, we travel the day before the game, and so you might practice, or you travel to wherever the city is. You leave in the morning, and you might practice that afternoon in the visiting city, and then you have your day of game skate. So really, the Hawks use the ice very little, and then when they are practicing, Joe Quinville's used it. Generally, his practices are no longer than 50 minutes, high impact, cardiovascular move, and so the players don't get bored. But the rest of the time, you get 23 hours for all practical purposes that ice is vacant. So that's where we want to put it back in the community side.
Okay, a practice facility that's maybe used twice a week for 40 minutes. Did anybody say, Rocky, what are you doing for $70 million here?
Yeah,
you gave Chicago a nice gift.
Yeah, John McDonough was the first one.
Did he?
Are you freaking nuts? But as long as we could tie it in with the foundation, and then with our sponsorships and what we can do, the nice thing is the Hawks, have a number what they have to raise every year, and as far as the sponsorships to cover our nut, and then what we can do is, as long as we can, break even on the ice, we can actually retire that debt over time.
Okay, I'm watching my clock here, and something that said it's ready for bedtime just popped up. So I'm thinking maybe we're near the end here. But I just want to ask this. Are you going to make the playoffs this year, Rocky?
There's every indication we will. I'll tell you one thing, you have to believe that we're going to make it, and we're certainly, everyone in the Blackhawk organization believes we're going to make it, and I don't see any reason why not.
After the first win, you told the Chicago Tribune that you weren't making any money with the Hawks. Are you making any money with the Hawks now, Rocky?
Well, we're not making a lot, let's put it that way. So it depends, because we have to pay so much to the league, because the top 10 teams pay in to the bottom 10. So I can't use the word communism, but I can use socialism. Because if I use the word communism, Gary Bettman, a commissioner, could come back and find me. And 9 times out of 10, these things are already taped, and he hears them by the time I leave the building.
That's great. I wouldn't presume to say, but you just did. Okay, Rocky, thanks.
But anyway, so
Yeah.
it just makes it a little harder.
All right.
And obviously, if we're not in the playoffs, it makes it a little harder too.
All right. Tony, thank you for joining us. Rocky,
Well,
thank you. Thank all of you. The book is The Breakaway. There's a table right over there if you're interested in having a signed copy afterwards. And we appreciate your attention. You're a wonderful audience. Thank you for letting me join you.
Thank you.